Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Derek here, and today we're going to be doing a sort of tutorial, walkthrough, demonstration, all of the above of the AWS command line interface. You'll see it abbreviated all over the place, though, as CLI. So today we have a few different uh, portions, let's call it. So we're going to go over the initial installation and configuration of the CLI. Okay, we're going to look at a couple common different services like EC2, S3, DynamoDB, etc., and some common commands that you may use with them. Okay, and then at the end, I'll actually leave you with a few challenges that you can do on your own because, the best way to get better at something is to do it. All right. So for this sort of walkthrough demonstration, you're obviously going to need some sort of command prompt or a shell. I am on Windows, as you can see here, so I will be doing things the Windows way, but Linux and Mac, it's very similar. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you are going to want to come and just search for the CLI, AWS CLI documentation, and it'll bring you to this homepage, okay? Once you get here, just go ahead and right click, open this in a new tab so you can reference this. As we go, I'll be referencing it here and there. And for the challenges, you'll also want to reference this as well. Okay. But if you scroll down here, it's going to list you'll see these are all the different AWS services here that you can work with. And that's one of the great things about the CLI is that it's very versatile in that you can work and manipulate, update, delete, create all sorts of resources in your AWS infrastructure. So it's very handy. It's not necessarily as user-friendly as the console, for example, but long term, if we want to be efficient cloud administrators, then we definitely are going to want to work with CLI, okay? And then if I were to, for example, let's just say click in DynamoDB, you could see that these are the available commands. There's quite a few of them. It's nothing though if we go to like EC2, look at all these commands. There's a lot that you can do with your instances, okay? So obviously we're not going to go through every single command for every service. We'd be here for like a good 5,000 hour video. We're not going to do that. But let's go ahead and get into it, all right? So once you come in here, go ahead and open up the user guide. And let me just go ahead and mute this. Sorry, guys. And what we're going to do is, if you don't already have the CLI installed on your computer, you're going to need to do that first. Okay. So if you want to read more about the CLI, here it is, but we're just going to go here to get started. Prerequisites. So one thing you are going to want to do actually, and you can just do this from the console, is create a admin IAM user that has an access key and pretty much all the permissions to interact with everything, because your CLI sessions, once we configure it with your access keys, are going to inherit whatever IAM user that key is linked to. All right, so if I come here actually and I go to IAM, I'll just give you an idea of what this looks like. So I'm going to actually be using this user right here, teacher, and you can see it has all sorts of permissions here. Administrator access is kind of the main one you need. I've added a few just testing here and there over the course of time. But if you come into here to security credentials, you're going to want to create an access key. Okay. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, why are you showing me your access key? These are supposed to be secret. You're right. After this gets done, I'm going to deactivate and eliminate these and make new ones. So you will not be able to use my credentials to get into my account. So, haha. All right, but this one, you can only have two, like it says right here. So if you're not sure how to do this, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this one and make a new one, just so we can see how to do it here. All right, so now you'll see this isn't grayed out anymore, so I'll hit create access key. We want to use the CLI. And I'm just going to check this box here saying that there's better ways potentially according to AWS, but we're going to do this for this demonstration. You can just put like description here if you want. I'll just say test. and then create access key, boom. All right, so now you can see that it has given me an access key. So you're going to want to copy this. You could just click this and then put it in like a notepad. We're going to need it here in a second. And then you're also going to want to take this secret access key, which this is the only time you'll be able to see this. Okay, once I click done, leave the screen, I can't see this anymore. So make sure you take note of this, okay? Copy both of these, paste them into a notepad. We will come back to them, okay? And then once you hit done, you should come down here and you'll see it listed here, okay? This is my new one. You can see created just now, all right? All right, so we have that prerequisite now. So now we are going to want to install and actually configure the CLI. All right, so if we come over here to install update, just depending on whatever OS you have, maybe just pause me for a few minutes and just go through these couple steps here. And then once you get done with that, you should be able to type AWS dash version and have it prompt up with the version. So if I do that here, you can see that I have it installed and I'm ready to go. Okay. So now that we have the CLI installed, we're going to actually need to configure it to use our access keys and our credentials. Otherwise, it's not going to know, what user to be making these API calls as. Okay. All right. So all we need to do for this is type AWS configure, and it's going to prompt you to say, okay, enter your access key ID. I already have this one here, which is my existing one here, because you can see it ends in XWAS. Okay. So you're going to put yours in, hit enter. Secret access key, do the same thing, hit enter. Default region name. So my default region is just US East 1, just keeping it simple. But if that's not necessarily a region you're close to, you can just find here whichever region you're closest to, wherever it is. If you're kind of out there, you may have to enable a specific region, which you can do in settings. You can look that up though if that's what you need to do. But I'm just going to use US East 1. You can use whichever you want. So just go ahead and type that in, hit enter. And then default output format. So the most commonly used ones are JSON and YAML, but you can use a couple other ones. But we're just going to use JSON. I would recommend using that as well. It's pretty easy to read, especially on the command prompt. So you can just type in JSON, hit enter, and there we go. So now what we can do to make sure that everything is good and, it kind of took our access key and everything looks how it should. You can type in AWS configure get AWS access key ID, and it should spit back out your access key. And as you can see here, this is my access key. All right, so I am good to go, and you should see the same thing. All right. So assuming you see your access key listed and it looks okay, we will go ahead and carry on. All right, I've got kind of the agenda over here that I'm looking at. So probably the most common service with AWS, spoiler alert, is EC2. So we are going to do a few things with EC2 first. So I've already started up an instance here. It's just, free tier instance, T2 micro, nothing fancy, nothing crazy. All right. But one thing that you can certainly do is you can type in AWS EC2 describe instances, and it will describe the instances that you have running. Okay, I only have the one instance running, so it's only going to describe the one instance. So as you can see, it's got the image ID that I've used, the instance ID, so you can see this matches with the instance ID up here. Okay, the same instance type, whatever, that's the key pair name it's using. Okay, so you'll notice that it looks like it kind of cuts off. Well, the reason why is because say you had, 10 instances or even a handful of instances listed, it, wants you to kind of hit enter to keep pushing through to list all of your instances, okay? And as you can see, there's a lot of properties on these event instances. I've got an EBS device as the root volume attached to this instance here that's talking about. But you know, this obviously is a lot more information kind of right up front and in your face than, you know, having to come here and okay, select this, go to networking, whatever, you know, it's just more accessible, right? So that's again why we want to use the CLI, okay? Uh, so if you're on a Windows, you can hit Control C. It'll pop you out of that. I think on Mac, it's Command C, if I remember right, something along those lines. But yeah, that's going to be our first command of the day. And if I wanted to, say I wanted to stop this test instance, okay, what we could do is we could say AWS EC2 stop instances, and then before we go any further, you may notice that these commands are starting with AWS. That's going to be pretty global. And most of the time, it's also going to be preceded by the service that you want to actually, you know, work with, and then the actual kind of prompt, okay? And this is where we can reference the documentation here. So if I find EC2, and then I'm just going to do Control F here, go to stop instances. You could see that stop instances is the sort of key component that you need, the key argument that you need. And then you're also going to need to specify an instance ID with the value, but there's also all sorts of other, arguments and commands and values you could specify here. If you need to get quite specific, you could hibernate your instance, you could forcefully stop it, whatever you need to do, okay? We're just going to keep it simple, and we will say AWS EC2 stop instances, instance ID, and I am just going to go ahead and grab this instance ID here, okay? And I'm going to paste it, I'm going to hit enter, and you will see now that, okay, it's stopping instances. Its current state is in stopping, okay? The previous state was running. So if I come here and I hit refresh, you can now see that it's gone because I have a filter here that says instance state equals running. But if I clear that, there's my instance. It's stopping. Pretty easy, right? I'm going to keep this stopped because I'm going to terminate it later and I don't want to pay for things that I'm not using. You shouldn't want to either. And there we go. It's completely stopped now. Perfect. But if you wanted to, say you wanted to start it again, you could do something extremely similar. You could just say EC2 start instances, instance ID, that's the instance ID. It's that easy, right? So the CLI doesn't really have to be super complicated, guys. It does not have to be super complicated, all right? So that's EC2, all right? Let's go ahead and clear our command prompt. And let's move on to S3, okay? So in S3, I have a few buckets. So what we can do is we can type S3ls, which is going to list my buckets. You can see I've got a few of them, okay? I'm going to be working with this third day of spring bucket, all right? And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I list my files here, I have this test.txt file here. Don't look at my taxes. It's not your business. Test.txt. I want to take this text file and I want to put it into my S3 bucket. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to say AWS S3CP test.txt, and then you're just going to put in the path to your bucket. So third day of spring bucket, I think is what it was called. Yep, third day of spring bucket. All right, and that is what we'll say for a successful message here. So what we can now do to just verify that it is there is we can say, okay, AWS S3ls, and then same thing, let's put in the path to that bucket. So third day of spring bucket. And you could see there it is. All right, test.txt, perfect. So copy that file into our bucket. All right, much easier again than going, you know, okay, I'm gonna go in to S3, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna go find that bucket, I'm gonna drill down to it, I'm gonna say upload, I'm gonna select the file from the GUI. You know, it's just unnecessary steps, right? I was able to do this in like a tenth of the time, okay? And same thing, if we wanted to, for example, remove this text file, we could again go into the console, go to S3, go to the bucket, go to the file, say remove, specify it, whatever. Or we could just say, all right, I want to remove this object, so I'm going to say AWS S3RM and then put in the path to that object. So third day of spring bucket slash test, yep, .txt. And same thing, you could see that it's kind of the same message, success message. So if we now list the contents of that bucket again, you'll see that, okay, now test.txt is gone. So we were successful. Super easy, right, guys? It's definitely not hard to use the CLI, okay? All right. So now another very, very common service that you will be working with is IAM. So if we back up again here and look for IAM, you can see that there's quite a few, commands here. Let's just maybe say, we just want to list out our IAM users, keep it nice and simple, okay? So what we can do is, as you might have guessed, we can just say AWS IAM list users. All right, and there they are. Okay, cool. So I have my users, the user ID, ARN, create date, when have they last used their actual password. Pretty neat, right? And then if you have a bunch of users, you could just keep entering, tabbing through them here. Okay, oh, that was it. All right, easy. All right. And if you wanted to, say you wanted to create a user, you could say AWS IAM, create user, and then user name. Let's just say, new user 123. All right, boom. So now if we run this command here to list our users, you can now see new user 123 exists. Perfect. Easy, right? Doesn't have to be hard. Does not have to be hard. So I'll close out of that, clear that. All right. So now let's move on to let's do RDS, right? Relational Database Service, very commonly used service, and for many reasons. But I've already set up a RDS instance here. So if I just come in here to RDS in the console and pull up my instance here. Make sure when you're testing things out, guys, you create the free tier resources. Don't pay for anything you don't need. All right. So we've got database 1, test database, whatever, nothing fancy, dbt3 micro, free tier, okay? So if we were to come in here and let's say I want to, list out my instances, AWS, take a guess, RDS, okay? Now we want to describe db instances, and if you do make a typo, it'll let you know. So invalid choice, maybe you meant that, which is pretty helpful. So I did mean that. So let's actually spell it right. And you could see, okay, there, boom, there's database 1, right? dbt3 micro, Postgres. Yep, that's what I would expect to see because I only have this one database. All right. So I'm going to hit Control C, get out of that, CLS, clear that. And let's say, maybe we want to, remove a database. All right, say I want to get rid of this database because I don't need it anymore. All right, so if we come into here to RDS and go here, and let's just say, I forget if it's delete. Yep, delete DB instance. Okay, so we need to say delete DB instance and then specify the DB instance identifier. So let's go ahead and do that. So AWS RDS deletes DB instance. Give it a flag DB instance identifier. And we need to go find this now. So what we can say right here, database 1, that is my identifier. Excuse me. Okay, looks like I copied more than I needed to, so I'm just going to type that in. That's not a hard um, identifier. So database one. So final DB snapshot identifier is required unless skip final snapshot is specified. So it wants us to skip final snapshot. So let's see. So we can say skip final snapshot. Let's try, I haven't really done this at the end, but let's go ahead and see if it just wants us at the end there. So skip final snapshot. And there we go, boom. So now it's going to go ahead and delete it, no more error. So you can see again, it's in the status of deleting. And if we come back here, refresh, it is now deleting. Perfect. We're not paying for a database that we are no longer using. All right, Control C, get out of that. CLS, clear that. And there we go. Okay. So I now have reached a point where hopefully this makes more sense to you. Okay, it's really not hard. Or I should say complicated, right? It can be a little weird if you have, again, maybe complicated resources, maybe multiple resources, but this documentation is going to be your best friend, and you could always flag pretty much any command with the debug flag to get more information on something if it's not working as you might expect it to, okay? But as you can see, most of the, well, not because I closed it, but most of the time, it will give you some sort of error in your face that's telling you what's going on. Again, as opposed to coming in here, sometimes it doesn't necessarily give you like a good description of what's actually happening, why something isn't working as expected. But CLI is a lot more informative in that regard, okay? So I've got a few different challenges for you based on these services we just looked at today. All right, if you want to pause me and look at these, feel free. But here we go. So EC2 challenge. So create an EC2 instance that's going to use the default Linux 2 AMI and then SSH into it. Okay. So a hint here is, okay, remember you want to look into the run instances command and the AWS documentation for obtaining the default AMI ID for whatever region you specified when you configured your CLI, right? Remember that AMIs are region specific, okay, guys? Here, let me just throw this in there and make this a little easier to read. Okay. Let's do that, do that. All right, so EC2, S3, IMR. All right, perfect. So S3, create a bucket, upload a file, and then set that file to be publicly accessible. So you're going to want to review create bucket, CP, and the put-object-acl commands. Okay. So for IAM, you're going to want to create a new IAM user, attach a policy, granting the user read-only access to S3. All right. So go ahead and review the create user and attach user policy commands for that one. All right. And then finally, you've got the RDS challenge, which is going to have you creating an MySQL RDS instance. Go ahead and connect to it and then just run, some kind of basic SQL query. Okay. It doesn't even have to bring back data. You just don't want to see errors. All right. So for this, you want to go ahead and take a look at the create DB instance command and make sure you specify the required parameters that you need to create a MySQL RDS instance in your particular region. All right. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, remember that the CLI is, if you're not super technical, it's not something that you need to be scared of or intimidated by. It just takes a little bit of practice, but remember that AWS has great documentation. So just come to the AWS CLI command line reference, look for whatever service you're using, and then within that, just look for the command. It's only got a handful there. Look for the command that describes what you are basically trying to do. Okay. All right. So that is your CLI tutorial and walkthrough. Good luck on the challenges, and we will see you in the next video.